Why is it that men will sail the 7 seas, climb the highest mountains, look into the vast expanse of the universe and try to unravel those mysteries, and yet, in the end, they're strangers to their own heart? For me, this journey has not really been about the ark. It's been about really finding something more important in life and more lasting. What I've tried to do in the last year is actually take more of an inward journey and ask myself, what is it that we're really searching for? There's men that have come up here, their marriages are broken, they have broken relationships, broken families. They're good men, in many cases godly men, but life in some cases has been hard. I really bonded with these men. I think they have hearts of gold. I've traveled the world, been to 60 countries, 6 continents. I've climbed 5 of the 7 summits. I've skied to the North Pole. I've journeyed to the ends of the earth. But I did not have the courage until the past year to make an 18-inch journey from your head to your heart.
So we hope for good weather.
I feel like I'm a better person, better father, better man because of the Ark expedition. We're looking for some type of redemption, some type of transcendent moment where we step out of the grind of life and we find something mystical, magical, something spiritual that just elevates our souls. I sought the Ark, but instead I found the face of God.
Really excited about being here. Thank you, Pastor Phil, for allowing me this opportunity to share. So you saw in the video here, it's really a juxtaposition of 2 different narratives that are happening, and I think it in many ways illustrates what life is like on a real level. We have an obvious narrative of our life that is explicit. It's what we do. We wake up every day. We're a father, we're a mother, we're a son, a daughter. We go to work. We have an occupation. We have career goals. We go to church. We're involved in the community. All of these things are great and wonderful, and that's the obvious narrative of our life that we find ourselves walking into. And it's a script that plays out, and we do it until the end of our days, and then hopefully nice people have nice things to say about us when that story is done, and the preacher doesn't have to lie. And so it's this part of life that's like, yeah, you know what, I know I'm supposed to be doing these things. And it's very obvious, and it's very explicit, and so when you watch the film, you'll see that here's a bunch of guys, a bunch of yahoos like myself. There's only one professional actor, and he actually doesn't act in the film. He's just the narrator. Gary Sinise, Lieutenant Dan, is actually our narrator, and so everyone else is just these average guys that somehow got involved in this crazy story of looking for Noah's Ark, which I have to educate my children's teacher every year because they're like, man, your kids are really smart. I have a 10 and a 12-year-old, and they're really great kids, and they actually are mentoring some other students in the class, but they have a very active imagination. They're telling us that you looked for Noah's Ark, and you ski to the North Pole, and you do all these crazy things, and so I have to tell them, no, it's really true. It's actually that. So at least my kids know what I do for a living, because a lot of us get dressed up when we go to a building somewhere. My kids know, okay, Dad is a little different, and he does things a little bit differently, but it's kind of cool, and so they're part of that story. So these are things that are obvious. They come to the surface, and we're looking for Noah's Ark, and we've spent 5 summers looking for this thing, some of which is actually over a 6-year course. And that story is still not done. And so we're looking for this ark, and we're trying to find this ship buried in ice, because if we find this ship, it's more than just a piece of wood. It's probably the greatest archaeological discovery that any one of us could make. Greater than the Ark of the Covenant, because we know that God makes his habitation inside of us today, and Jesus Christ comes into our hearts, and we have a relationship with him. But if you find this ship, like the gentleman said in the trailer, it changes everything. It changes all theologies. So you can start with anthropology and archaeology and go all the way down the timeline to zoology, and it changes all of these things, because now all of a sudden you have to rewrite all these different textbooks, and you have this most fantastical story in the Bible that usually gets relegated to, either an animal shelter or the children's nursery theme, and nobody really, that's kind of a crazy story. But if this story is true, if there is a ship on top of a mountain at 17,000 feet that has no business being there, then perhaps all the other stories are true as well, because it is certainly one of the most fantastical or fantastic stories that are involved in the biblical narrative. And so we understand what's at stake here. And so we're willing to risk life and limb. I'm an explorer. I'm an entrepreneur by background. I was a minister as well for a season of my life. But most of the guys that are there are really, really smart people. They have patents to their name. They're Indiana Jones type. They can read the Rosetta Stone. They speak dead languages, but they can't tie their shoes. So I'm the guy that's there. I mean, I literally dressed 2 or 3 of them every day. Like, oh, it's almost like, I was Mama Santa Claus or something. They come out and they're like, okay, do this. What do I do here? And Brother Kevin and all that stuff. So I was really this average guy that had some experience climbing high altitude mountains, 5 of the 7 summits, and I also had a trip to the North Pole. So I was used to extreme environments, and I knew that none of these guys knew what they were getting into. When you climb at 17,000 feet, just to kind of get a picture here, if I were to take out 60% of the oxygen in this room, most of you would be comatose in a matter of minutes. Your brain would swell up, your lungs would fill up with fluid, you would have both cerebral edema and pulmonary edema. So when you're doing work, and it's almost at the elevation of Everest Base Camp, which is about 17,500 feet, we're approaching 17,000 feet, and this is our workplace. This is where we get up every day, and we're trying to do something that's Herculean. We're trying to dig a hole into the ice. And this isn't Kansas City ice, it's not Grand Rapids, Michigan ice. This is glaciated ice. It's like concrete, so we've got running chainsaws, we have a pulley system, we've got fumes, we've got guys fainting with running chainsaws in their hands. Top that off with a geopolitical situation that is far from ideal. So we always have a military detail that comes with us every summer because we're in a part of the world where there's 2 different groups. It's kind of like a Hatfield and McCoy thing, and they both are on the mountain, and they don't like each other, and they just spend a lot of energy killing each other. The PKK, which is a U.S. State Department recognized terrorist group, is our porters by day, and perhaps they have another occupation by night. And then we have a Turkish tank battalion that's at the foot of Mount Ararat that's using that as target practice along with the PKK. So you have a lot of people that don't like each other. Sounds like an average day at work, right? And then on top of that, you've got all this storm activity. It's so electrified and so the static is in the air to such an extent that many occasions, and I've never had this on other mountains in the world, in the Rockies you might experience some of this as well, but it literally felt like you just stuck your head into a beehive because your hair is standing straight up, you can hear it crackling, and you're looking around you, and what do you have? You have a lot of aluminum around you, right? So you got ice axes, and you have crampons, and you've got poles for your tents. So there's a lot of different things that are happening here at once. You've got 60% less oxygen. You're trying to excavate a hole to figure out what this anomaly is that you're trying to track through remote sensory intel and your ground-penetrating radar and your seismic and electrical resistivity tests that are all saying there's something underneath the ice. We just don't know what it is. And we won't know what it is until we get boots on the ground and we actually do core samples and drill into this ice. So every year, it's like, wow, we're trying to find this thing, and we felt like the technology was getting better and better, and our intel was getting better and better, and we thought, man, this is going to be the year. We're going to find Noah's Ark this year, and it's going to change the world. They're going to have to rewrite all the history books. It's going to be the holy grail of archaeology. And so every year, I began to get more and more invested in this process. Some of you, anybody a deer hunter here? So you know what it's like to get buck fever. I mean, if you're into baseball, whatever it is. So my thing was the Ark. It just began to overtake me. It almost became like an obsession to the point where you have no objectivity left. And so the obvious narrative was, yes, we need to find the Ark. And if we find the Ark, something great will happen. And we can somehow maybe bring something redemptive to the world that could actually bring people into the kingdom. The harder part is to look at the narrative and find out what is less obvious, what is oblique, and what is implicit. So your life has really 2 narratives. You have one that's obvious, it's what you do every day, it's the labels that you wear, or the mask, if you will, or the occupation that you have. It's what you do in life, it's how people identify you or how you identify yourself. But there's this other narrative that runs underneath that narrative. It's subterranean, it's almost subconscious, and it's deeper, and it's more profound, and it has a whole lot more to do with your calling and the reason why you were born. So a lot of times we get this mixed up. We think what we do is kind of like why we're supposed to be here, and that could be partially true, but there's something larger than that. So when you read verses like Proverbs chapter 25, verse 2, it talks about how the glory of God is the secret. The glory of kings or queens, or all of us are royals, if you will, because we all came out of the garden and we all were royal regents and we were these incredible individuals who were imitating the image of Christ, and there was no disconnect between us and our Father, and so we could walk with him in the garden, and we could be naked in every way, shape, and form, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, because it wasn't so much about not having clothes on, it was about being true. Everything that we did before the fall was true. There was nothing to hide from. There was no shame. There was no regret. There was no pain. There was no shadow. There was no sin. And so all of us are trying to get back to this place where the glory of kings is the search. The glory of a queen, the glory of the royals, if you will, not to be connected necessarily with Kansas City, but it's what makes us who we really are. And so I found that about the third year going through this whole explorative journey, that there was something in this story that God was trying to speak to me that he had to use very obvious images to impact me with, because I'm a real image guy. I've got ADD, ADHD, and you can tell I'm kind of going a million miles an hour. I can work with this. When I go down south, they're like, man, you got to quit talking so fast. I mean, we don't do things quick. We always talk about we're fixing to do things, and then we do it. So it's just pop, 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 pop. So sorry about that. It's this Robin Williams approach. I have a lot of things that go on all at once. Thank you for humoring me. So we get to this point where we've just got to settle into this story, and I'm thinking, there's something deeper that's going on here, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but I have a feeling, I've got this sneaking suspicion that God is making a secret out of this ark, and he is using that search to bring about who I really am, or in my case, who I once was. And he's using this ark as leverage to bring me to this point where he's making it so obvious that I can't actually miss it. And so when you find this story called Finding Noah, a lot of people are like, well, why do you call that movie Finding Noah? Are you actually looking for a body? And if you find him, is that like the secret to everything? No, I think what the filmmakers, and they don't spell this out, I think they leave a lot of room for personal interpretation, but I think what the filmmakers are trying to say is that when you find Noah, you find yourself. Because we're all Noah. We feel like, quite frankly, the center is collapsing. You don't have to look hardly at all in the news. Turn it on for 5 minutes, and it just feels like the world is just erupting in chaos. All the tension that's felt between the races and religion and different ethnic backgrounds and socioeconomic perspectives, it just feels like there's this incredible ball of chaos. And it's like the poets were talking about, how the center is collapsing and how the falcon is just circling and circling, and we're watching this thing unravel like a thread. And Noah, I think, probably felt like that because it's down to really 8 people. And everybody else around him is just shouting blasphemies. I mean, this guy had like 100-year-odd preaching assignment, and he doesn't have any converts. Every day he's waking up and he's doing this project and he's working with his family, and he probably had some hired workers, and every day he's saying the same exact thing. This is coming, judgment's coming. And so a lot of scientists believe that the imagination of the people couldn't even quantify or couldn't even calibrate the idea of rain, because perhaps before the flood there was the canopy in effect, and so mankind could live to almost a millennia. And reptiles could grow into dinosaur proportions. And so for them to even conceive of a flood, of rain coming, of springs opening up, it was probably so foreign to their imagination they couldn't even conceptualize it. But this whole idea of righteousness was foreign to them as well. And so here you have Noah in Genesis chapter 6, verse 8, who found something that everybody else was looking for, but he's the only one that found it. And I guess you could argue that it found him. Genesis chapter 6, verse 8, depending on what translation you have, I like the King James Version. It talks specifically about how Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, or favor in the eyes of the Lord. So we're all Noah. We're all trying to find this sense of grace. We're all trying to find this safe place. We're all trying to find this ship that we can enter into. Now, I want to posit to you this morning that Noah was saved long before he built a ship. In fact, in Genesis 6:8 again, it talks about the favor. It talks about God's grace that came into his life. And so in some way, shape, or form, Noah was able to grasp a hold of this mystery, or this mystery found him while the world was drowning in madness. And I find that as I speak everywhere, mostly in men's conferences, that there's this sense of desperation. It's quiet, it's desperate, like Thoreau talked about, and it's this idea that why am I here, and what am I supposed to be doing, and what is my actual calling? What is the thing that really puts fire in my bones, and why do I feel so emotionally stuck and so emotionally vacant that I don't really feel passion for anything except for maybe the Royals? I mean, I get excited about that, but I come to church and it's just, it's like this whole visage comes on, and it's just, the Super Bowl mania takes over, but we don't have that with our relationship with God. We have it in sports, but we don't have it in our connection with Him. And this is the God of the universe that we're talking about. So what do I do for a living now? I basically am Bilbo Baggins, very tall. I got my handkerchief here. And I basically help a bunch of dwarves find home. But to get home, we've got to tackle this dragon. Smaug is inside the lonely mountain, which is emblematic of our heart. We're looking for the Arkenstone, which is emblematic of the human heart. I am climbing a mountain, which is called Agrida, which is the painful mountain in the Turkish language. I'm climbing this mountain every year, and I didn't realize that at the end of the whole story, what I'm really looking for is not the Ark. I am looking for my heart. I am looking for the part of me that existed before the dragon came, that existed before the day of darkness came, that existed before I went through 2 divorces, that existed before I went through bankruptcy, that existed before I spent 3 years living in my truck once I climbed out this mountain because I couldn't find my home address. I'd rather live in a vehicle than have to come home to an empty place, because at least in the vehicle I think, wow, it's just another phase of the expedition. And this whole thing will figure itself out. But what I'm really dealing with is, no, I'm just scared to death of being alone inside a room, because it just reminds me of my life. Vacant, empty, void of any human connection. Here's what I can tell you. When Christ comes into your life, he touches the deepest and darkest wound that you are hiding so desperately from him, and he touches that place. And when he touches that place, he lets you know that you are a human being that is worth being saved. Can you imagine being a leper and everybody's running the opposite way, and it's almost like you're a pedophile in a sense, where you've got this electronic collar around you, and everywhere you go you have to shout, unclean, unclean. Stay away, keep the kids away, keep everybody away. I can't be around play. All this stuff, and you walk around and you've got this sense of incredible shame, and you're trying to connect, and then Christ comes into that situation and does the exact opposite. He doesn't just wave a holy handkerchief or become the televangelist and tell you to buy a product and something good will happen. He comes in and he touches your leprosy, and he kisses where that leprosy is. Almost like what the Pope did a year or 2 ago with that man that was incredibly deformed, and kissed that man on his wound. That's what the cross does. That's what grace does. It touches those desperate places.